Greetings, YouTube, and once again, welcome to the kingdom. Tonight we have a special feature we're going to be doing to start a new series here called Titan Builds. Today's Titan Builds are a shout out to Scotty Too Hotty, who requested this through the comments section and provided these skills as well as the Titans that he would like input on. Drew, it is a pleasure to see you, man. I think you guys are going to enjoy this series quite a bit because I've put a lot of thought into it, and I'm looking forward to additional comments. And those of you who join the stream that would like to join me on Discord, as always, it's open. Alright. Now, this aside, I am going to need to go into some explanation before I go into the actual Titan builds. Thank you, Drew. Thank you. Now, this explanation is going to be a little bit on how damage works, what the old meta was, how X skills have affected the meta, because that will play into the Titan builds that I'm going to recommend. So we're going to set some groundwork before we go into the builds and why these builds are going to be better than normal. Welcome to the stream, Cooter. You guys are always welcome in here. I appreciate you guys' presence. And afterwards, we may do a few of the Theater of War as well. This new one is one that I actually need some of the relics from, so I don't mind dropping a few gems on, but I'm still trying to save mine for the events that I need. Okay. Born, welcome to the stream, man. Alright, so to set the groundwork for this series, Titan Builds, we are going to have to go back and we need to understand how damage actually works. For those of you watching here that want a more in-depth explanation on this matter, I have provided a link to the developer's YouTube explanation on it. But the basic concept behind it is that armor caps at 70%. This is the first part of it. Now, you can get armor that's higher than this, but you can't reduce damage beyond 70% with armor. Now, there are two areas that you can reduce damage. That's armor and resistances. And so, for example, if I have 70% armor and 90% resistance to a particular element that's attacking me, I'm going to have my armor reduce the damage, and whatever damage comes through the armor then has to go through my resistances. So if 100 reduced by 70, I have 30, then I reduce 30 by 90%, and I'm basically taking 4 damage underneath the ideal rule set. Okay, so with that out of the way, your armor can go higher than that, but the only reason why you would want it to go higher is to combat armor piercing that troops and Titans will bring into battle. For example, if I have 50% armor piercing and you have 70% armor, my 50% armor piercing will reduce your armor to 20%, and thus I would do the same math that we just did a moment ago, using 20% reduction as opposed to 70%. Alright, so this is the basic idea on how the developers have set up how at least armor works. So moving on to resistances. Resistances cap at 90%, with the exception of, the resist to range, resist to melee, and we will not be discussing those because those represent a breaking of the rules in Dawn of Titans, and we're only going to stick with the consistency of the elemental resist and armor resist at the moment. So if you guys have questions about that in the future, I will be going over that in detail as well. Okay. Now, moving on from that point, for those, there is currently no way in the game to currently reduce the resistances that a target has that you're attacking. So if they're at 90%, you're not going to reduce the damage there. When the game first began, there was a skill provided to troops that could get around these resistances called percent damage to Titans. And basically what it would do is once the armor was taken out in the damage reduction, it would just ignore the resistances for the element, even if the element was there, and would just apply that percentage of your damage directly to the Titan. So that's how that skill worked. But it ended up dying off because of other reasons, and so as we're going to learn in today's episode, the Dawn of Titans team had to come up with a different method to get damage through on and alright, I am sorry about that, guys. My phone screensaver came up and turned that off. So we are back now, and just to finish up our next section we're moving on to after exploring elemental resistances and armor is we have to understand the old meta before we can understand how the X skills have impacted the game. Once we've done that, we're going to go into the Titan builds and discuss what relics you need for your Titans based upon the skills that you currently have. Okay, so moving back to the old meta. The old meta that I'm referring to is the meta of the unkillable Freyas and the troops that were just horrendous to fight. And I have a Titan that somewhat represents the old meta I'm going to go ahead and bring up on the stream. Ron, it's great to have you in the stream. Now, once again, those of you just joining in, I'm providing some background to why certain skills are in the game and how they're going to affect your Titan builds. And so now we're discussing the old meta after discussing how armor and resistances work. The old meta represented the unkillable Titans or unkillable troops because those troops and Titans were able to stack armor and resistances up the wazoo to reduce damage to the point where they're just unkillable at that point. And one of the best Titans to represent this meta from the troop angle is Skolnar. Now, what you're going to notice about... Oh, you know what? It'll be easier if I just go to my garrison. Alright, so what you're going to notice about Skolnar is, as he's buffing his troops, you're going to see that my Skolnar's Goliaths have 150% armor and 90% resist to ice, 100% resistance to physical, 84% resistance to fire. So the elements that I'm basically maxed out on resistances, meaning that there's only a few elements that they can come in and do damage. Now, before they even get to that resistances, they've got to go through my armor, punch through my armor. And so the hard part in the old meta was that you had to punch through the armor and you had to deal with the resistances on the back end. And so the reason why it was so hard is most of the people in the game didn't have the relics needed to break through the armor here. So they may get 50, 70% armor resistance, but that still left me 80% armor at that point. And so, unless they started breaking over the 100% armor or armor piercing mark, they couldn't have done anything to these Goliaths. This meta slowly began to die off as more events released the event relics that provided the extra armor piercing available. And so that meta slowly started to die off. But it took a very long time for those of us that remember. Now, the key to this is with the screen. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that meta I'm talking about and how relics affected it. So you had to bust through both armor and Alright, come on, load up. Load up. Alright, well, I actually had a build set up here.
And shout out to Scotty Too Hottie, because this is actually I'm gonna be showing off to you guys. But for now, we're not going to go too much into the build, but I wanted to show you what the armor piercing on a correct build would be able to do against those Goliaths that are impregnable. Alright. Let's go ahead and get to a level that most people are familiar with. Let's say same level as my Goliaths, which will be level 21. So going down, I've got to go ahead and select the skills here. Oh, alright. Now after this video, if you guys want your own Titans to be covered in this, I will do my best. Just leave notes in the bottom what your Titan are, or Titan's abilities are, and we'll get right into it. But I've got to get to that point first. Now I'm not going to use the ultra rare 5-star relics in these builds, just because I want to make these somewhat realistic. Panthers. Alright. So when stacking armor piercing, this is how the old meta eventually died. We have the Bitter Dirks, which have been available since the beginning of the game. We had the Great Plague, which has been available, but a hard drop to get. Now is where it really started to get interesting, because you have your Tainted Blade, which allows for additional armor piercing. We throw in 2 Tainted Blades there, and even with nothing else but the relics, you guys are going to see here that these Panthers are able to reach 186% armor piercing. So the relics started to kill off the old meta. Ashley, real quick, the Theaters of War. I think it is a great thing to do for free-to-play, but not a great thing to spend a great deal of gems on, unless you're in desperate need of some of the relics that are dropped there. I'm going to be spending a few gems today in hopes that I can get a few more 4-star Frost Spears, but save your gems for the events where you're going to get the unique relics. A lot of the relics in the drops are going to be something that are natural drops, but we can cover that at another time. Alright, so this is probably over-explanation, but armor piercing started to kill the old meta because you could get past the armor of all of the units. That just left the resistances. Now, what ultimately killed the old meta is not these relics, because these relics had to have been acquired over time. What ended up killing the old meta, guys, is the introduction of the X skills. And how they ended up killing the old meta is very, very simple. It's, but let me go over each of the X skills first, and you guys will see what I'm talking about. So the X skill for armor, it far exceeded its predecessor in the value it provided for actual armor for units. But it has 2 major flaws that are currently in the system that I think the developers designed purposely. The first one is it's nearly impossible to max out resistances for those X skills on your troops, because the Titans no longer are giving buffs to resistances. And so you really have to choose at this point in the game if your defense is going to be armor-based or if it's going to be resistance-based. And so that's what that X skill armor did is, as long as they don't start doing X skills for resistances, that's where the current state of the game stands. Now, the other thing is the units that get the X skill buffs are at most buffed 3 times in the skill sets, and only Grenadiers have that privilege. So most of the time you get 2 X skill buffs, which prevents the stacking of overpowered units. And so the X skill buffs ultimately were a way to counteract the old meta for new people coming into the game. And that leads us to the most impactful X skill there is. Not that it's the best X skill, but the most meta-changing, which happens to be the armor-piercing X skill. Because now you no longer need the relics to push to get that 150% armor piercing to combat. It's 110% is naturally given to you. And so you're able to concentrate on other relics, or at least be able to combat those that are currently in the game without having to have spent months gaining the relics needed to get there. Alright. The X damage skill, it's just gravy. It's the brute force skill, and it's a good skill to have. There's not much more explanation needed for it. Now, with the separation of armor and resistances, with the separation of armor and resistances, what ends up happening is that the X skill for health gets an indirect buff, because stacking both armor and resistances is no longer viable, since you can cut through the armor unless you have an X skill armor skill, which you then can't get resistances for. So health is naturally moved to the number 2 slot as the number 2 most effective defensive skill. Alright. Alright. So, with that said, now we can actually move into the Titan build. So I appreciate you guys bearing with me as I go through this explanation. Now, the Basathi that Scott Tuhati actually sent over for me to review has the skills of Panther Damage, Panther Health, Panther Charge, Panther Health, and Panther Damage against Titans. Now, when building out the Basathi, your ultimate goal here to make sure you can crush through any units that are going to be attacking is to try to get between 130% and 150% armor piercing. Because those units that do stack the armor, you're still going to be able to cut a great deal into them. After you get that armor piercing, the next important skill that you need, in my opinion, is critical. So you can triple your damage. So as we go through here, you'll see I have Bitter Dirks set up, Great Plague set up, Tainted Blade set up. I would typically take out this other Tainted Blade at the bottom in favor of the critical relics, since this particular Basathi doesn't have any critical buffs. So if I was going straight damage with this Basathi, and I'm going to go ahead and switch this over to Scotty's troop level, I'd have 168% armor piercing, 89% critical. Now, Panthers, they're unique in the fact that, in my opinion, of the damage skills, you have Pouncing Aura, which is the most effective one. That charge that Panthers do, that damage is critical to making them work the way that they were intended to work. Following that, I think a next important skill you're going to have is, I believe, I have it listed out here in my notes, so bear with me for a moment. After you get the charge damage, it's important that you get that, armor piercing, critical, and then the charge damage is what you're looking at stacking first. And then after that charge damage, you can just go with regular damage. I'm not a huge fan of flanking, and I don't plan on going into that too much in this video. So if I was attacking a garrison with high armor, high resistance, I would use this build right here, because it would allow me to cut through their armor, and the skill that is naturally on these Panthers of damage against Titans would allow me to basically eat through any Titan that would have. So consider this a Titan killer, or even a high armor killing build. Now, if you're doing regular raiding and you're looking at, just raiding lands to pick up extra food and you want to take minimal losses, then at that point, you can just take these 3-star relics out, 3-star Tainted Bow, and then 3-star Bitter Dirks, and just throw in 2 mounted armors for yourself. That will give your troops the armor and health they need to withstand a little damage. But that concludes at least Basathi on the build that we're looking to build through for him or for her. And this unit right here basically built to take out castles. Now, moving on, he had another unit, that's the wrong one. He had another Titan that he wanted me to go over, and this would be what I would refer to as a subpar Siegfried. But even subpar Siegfrieds with the right skills can have a use. So bear with me for a moment as I put together his skill set. While I'm doing this, you guys are welcome to ask any questions or anything in the chat. I know this has been, me droning on quite a bit, but it's very important that you guys understand the basics of how damage works to understand how these builds that I'm recommending are intended to affect the game. Alright. So we're going to start off with that great militia health ability. Going on to archer health, followed by everyone's favorite spearman abilities, damage and okay. We're going to go ahead and switch that over to armor piercing. And then finally spearman armor piercing. So a lot of people, when they would see this Siegfried build, would say, "Hey, man, you got shafted." I enjoy putting these videos together, so I'm glad that you guys are enjoying them. So if I had this Siegfried, I'd need to analyze what are the... Okay, so Drew, you're asking, are you taking recommendations? Or do you BA your Titans you're explaining? I don't want you to get stuck here all night. No. I'm not going too much into recommendations at the moment. I just want to cover these builds, and you guys are welcome to put comments in the chat below. And I would encourage you to, because when Scotty reads this, I want him to see different versions of how these builds can affect the community. And I understand there are certain relics that are better at certain times. Now, what makes this Siegfried useful in regards to these abilities is that meta-changing ability in the 4th slot, armor piercing. I would much rather have armor piercing on my Siegfried than damage on my Siegfried. Because damage I can get in droves later on down the road with the right, even without the right relics. Damage will just naturally come from the relics that you naturally get. The armor piercing is what will allow this Siegfried to ultimately take down castles down the road. Those Mameshes that are stacking armor that can get to 200% armor. This ability will still allow him to take down those units. And so this is your ace in the hole Titan when it comes to that. Now, let's go ahead and bring up the archers. Now, I'm not even going to discuss the other abilities because you got subpar abilities for spearmen. The last thing you want is your spearmen doing damage when it takes them 2 years to get to the enemy units. Alright. I think I gotta... Sometimes this site does not want to work with me as much as I would hope. Alright. Okay, so scrolling down, it looks as though that for some reason, oh, here we go. It just loaded up. Alright, now that it's loaded up, we just want to look at the Archer relics. And doing the same thought process that I just gone over with you guys, we are looking at, with archers, we don't have the charge damage, so we need to get as much damage as we can, as well as critical. And so we're going to go with the traditional 4-star relic for the archers, as well as the 3-star relic as well. Alright. Let's go ahead and throw in that everyone's favorite new relic, the Munin. And a must-have relic, I think, for archers is the Bow of Kings. That leaves us with 2 more slots. Now, going through this, what I do notice is that for some reason this doesn't have the second Munin. I'm not sure if you can equip it. So I'm going to go with the Giant Axe version for archers, which gives me archer damage, archer armor piercing. And then that last slot, remember what we're trying to get is that critical up as well. And so there are no other easy relics that I can look for to increase the archer, like multiple archer damage. I mean, if you happen to have the old relic, I don't normally recommend using this because not hardly anyone has the ice arrows anymore. So I'd probably recommend going with the Iron Maul. Or not Iron Maul, but the Iron Mace. Pumping up that archer critical a little bit more. And so what you get at the end of the day is archer armor piercing of 228%, critical of 77%, and damage of about 3,220. While the damage is a little low, you're ultimately going to use your Titan and other units to protect your archers as they rain down fire on other units. And these are level 16 archers. And I'm just trying to preface that. Now, once again, these archers will be able to beat through those defenses that have just stacked armor because of that, the most important ability, attacking ability I think you can get for your attacking units, and that's armor piercing. Alright, now I have other thoughts on this particular matter, but I want to save them for additional videos, because today I've already gone on long-winded explanations on damage, how it works, and what type of relics you need to be looking for. Now, if you, for example, had a Titan that already buffed either armor piercing or Titan critical, you wouldn't need to stack as many critical relics, and you could just focus on damage and armor piercing. Because ultimately you want to try to get to 100% as quickly as possible, because tripling your damage every shot is more effective than adding an additional 50% damage. Now, another thing I want to notice about this particular Siggy is that the reason why we're not using any defensive relics is because of that second ability, Archer's Health. Archers aren't designed to really take damage. We all know that. But what you want to do with your archers is make sure that they can live through that fireball or that meteor storm, that one-of shot. And that's what the health ability does here. And that's why we don't need to include a defensive relic, so your archers can just basically take the shot and keep firing. If he didn't have these abilities, then one of the relics would need to buff the archers in a form or fashion to be able to resist some damage. I'm saying that you need to get armor piercing up to at least 130 to 150% level to be able to combat the basic armor stacking. If you can't combat that, then not only do you have to push through armor, but you have to push through resistances as well, Jeremy. Let me give you an example.
So I'm going to go back to my Siegfried I have here. Or not Siegfried, but my Skolnar. Once you reach that, 150%, you can normally combat most of the armor that people are stacking. And then you would only stack additional armor piercing for those special X-skilled armor titans that are out there, buffing Goliaths or something of that nature. Alright, so I need to go back. And I just want you to see traditional stacking of the old meta for titans that don't have X skills. So this Skolnar has, gives Goliaths 30% armor, health, fire resist, all those resistances. But it adds in the 30% armor. So when I look at the troop level, even with the relics I'm stacking, my Goliaths have 150% armor. So unless someone is bringing in, 120, 130, 140% armor piercing, my armor is reducing a great deal of the damage even before my resistances are impacted. And so, unless they're rocking poison damage or lightning damage, they have to take armor into consideration, or my Goliaths are just not going to be killable to them. And so that's why you've got to look for that baseline of 130, 140, 150% armor piercing just to be able to punch through some of these defenses you're going to be coming across. And yes, armor defense piercing is useless when it comes to defenses that aren't running armor, but at that point they're cutting out half of all their defensive capabilities as well. You know what, Drew? That is a good thought. Low-level troops should focus on, if you're attacking higher-level units, then yes, armor, piercing, and damage is what you need to focus on just to be able to punch through any damage. If you're attacking same-level troops, they have to have the right relics leveled up to even have this level of armor. Because let me show you what relics I'm running on these Goliaths. I have 4 armor buffing relics here. Alright, what have I gotten so far, Pisces? I'm not really sure what that question means. But yeah, 3 Coria, okay. Out of this event that we've been doing, I've gotten 1 4-star Avalanche. And so I'll be doing a few more runs with the hope of I can get some Frost Spears, as well as some Ice Rings. But, I like this event. I just don't know how many gems I'm going to be using on it. Alright. Now, do you guys have any additional questions on this first episode of Titan Builders? If not, I'm going to shut down the stream for about 10 minutes, and then I'll load back up another stream to go ahead and grind out some Theaters of War. I'll wait a few seconds for you guys to answer that question. Now, if you guys have any recommendations for Titans that you want me to review, they don't have to be perfect Titans. They can be subpar Titans. And I'll go over builds, the strengths of them, the weaknesses of them, and while these builds are not infallible, they'll have a purpose attached to them. Alright, Pisces, you are the man getting all that stuff, and I look forward to hearing all about it in my upcoming stream. But I want to go ahead and close this off now, because anyone who's watching these videos days from now, I don't want them to have to sit through an additional 30 minutes of me grinding when all of the important information is in the first 30 minutes. Alright, so that is a good point. I'm going to go ahead and end with that, Jeremy, on what a perfect Siegfried, for example. The skills that you're looking for
perfection in any unit is maximizing the base unit stats and what they're intended to do. And I'll quickly go through this. And I'm just going to use Siegfried as an example right now and explain why his skills are perfect, or the ones that I'm going to show you will be perfect. Let's see. It depends. You know, I gotta tell you, with the right relics, you can make any units good, but the perfect skills make it allow you to use more combination of relics to get your Titan where it needs to be. So, the first skill, I normally think Militia Health is the best one, but to be honest with you, I don't think too much of Militia, so I could care less what that first skill is. For archers, since they are a naturally attacking unit, the skills that you're really looking for are the armor piercing and the damage. If you can get those two skills, you're good as gold. Alright, now the other skills that Siegfried would have are Spearman Health and Spearman Armor. You don't want damage and armor piercing on your Spearmen because of the slowness of the unit. These units are meant to be beefy and to take the shots in the front line while the archers do the damage from the back line. If you rely on your Spearmen for damage, then any ranged unit on the other team is just going to mow you down before you even get a chance to use them. That's why you want these two things, because you want them to survive longer. And then if you're buffing your archers in the background, your archers will rain death and terror on your opponents. But that's why this particular Siegfried skills would be a perfect build. And it's not like in most battles you're going to be running a bunch of spearmen if you have perfect archery skills. So this would be a Siegfried that maybe I would put on defense when I needed him, and my defense would consist of maybe half and half spearmen and archers, and then when I needed him on attack, I'd just throw in all archers and throw in some fear spells. That way my archers could have a chance to deal the damage, and my spearmen would be there for defensive uses. In Scotty 2 Hotties one, since he only has armor piercing, the whole defensive idea is thrown out the window, because even if you're able to get all archers in there, there's ways to counteract that. But yeah, I mean, it depends on their use. What are you going to use them for? So even subpar Siegfried skills, you'll find a use for the Titan if you really look hard and you get the right relics for it. The best skills just allow you to use the best combination of relics, or the most combination of relics to make them work. Alright. But that covers this explanation. I will be back on in about 10 minutes. If you guys like this, then, like and subscribe. And expect more videos. I am looking for more Titan submissions. Thank you. Have a good day. From the kingdom. Alright, so